There was a lot of talk, of course, for the past couple of days of Keir Starmer's big speech being his make or break point of his career. And I think the, the thought line of it is he's well and truly already broken. And his speech, shall we say, was his Humpty Dumpty attempt to try and, shall we say, rebuild that image that was already broken practically from day one. And be prepared for, shall we say, something very similar to happen to Boris. Boris is going to use his speech, of course, in the coming week to, of course, energize the Conservative Party, get their voters out. But we're also going to see some interesting signs of things to come, mainly being that, as I've said for a while, get prepared for austerity on steroids. Rishi Sunak's speech, if he does one, I think he will, during the conference, will be very interesting to listen to because he will give us hints about what is about to be cut. And of course, the autumn budget will be no more than 2-3 weeks after the Conservative conference. So we know what will be coming. We know that there is already a 7% cut for all departments coming down the line, with potentially even harder cuts coming for some others. We've already covered that education apparently is meant to be really be getting a strict willow taken to it. I keep on saying it, but it just reinforces the point. The more and more we hear it, 2022 is going to be hard for a whole lot of people because we are going to have probably another crash potentially in the housing market. Again, due to COVID, the economy being incredibly stagnant because of Brexit, because again, we can't trade now effectively with our most closest trading partners, and it doesn't matter what these new trade deals that the new Tory trade minister gets because they're with countries hundreds of thousands of miles away. And quite frankly, they don't want our products. They've already got them there, or potentially from even, shall we say, people from closer to home. Like I say, this was why the notion of us joining the trade bloc with Mexico, the USA, and Canada was so laughed at because we've just left a trade bloc. What's Britain going to do? Just join every trade bloc there is and just be a member of them all? That won't work. But again, it'll be very interesting to see, of course, if there are any mentions, particularly at the fringe events, if there's any, shall we say, pro-Remain arguments coming from the Conservative Party. That will be very interesting, although I highly suspect that, shall we say, those elements, shall we say, will be there, but in hiding, which will be interesting. But needless to say, we are headed for a winter of discontent. And this is going to be really Boris's make or break moment, because if Boris fails this winter, then a lot of Tories are going to go, well, we can't keep Boris. We've got to get rid of him. And he could be very well out the door very, very quick. But we're going to go into, obviously, what is coming in terms of this winter of discontent now. So we're going to jump into the Byline Times with the poverty trap, how Boris Johnson's winter of discontent will impoverish us all. In June of 2020, Boris Johnson pledged not to return to the UK to austerity years of his predecessors. We ought to have known that he wasn't telling the truth. We are now having austerity in all but name. Food prices are rising, as are energy bills, and inflation is increasing at record rates. Meanwhile, instead of soothing the pain, the government has made a series of decisions that will only try to exacerbate the problems of the poor and middle-income families. And Johnson is providing over a poverty pandemic, and he doesn't even seem to care. Cutting the universal credit uplift is perhaps the most obvious example of this. At the time when the cost of living is rising dramatically, it is seen as remarkably cruel for the government to strip money away from struggling families. Yet, the government now seems remarkably cavalier about this approach. Johnson has claimed that he doesn't even think food shortages are likely and believes that wage rises will just simply offset the living costs. The Work and Pension Secretary, Theresa Coffey, declared that universal credit claimants can simply just make up the £20 a week by working an extra 2 hours. But both Johnson and Coffey are misrepresenting the reality. Johnson's fabled wage rises are primarily concerned in the economic sectors that have seen the most acute staffing shortages. They are also only to be temporary and may not do enough to actually make up for the inflation prices. Coffey's claims are palpably false because of the way of the taper of the universal credit works. Claimants would actually have to work an extra 9 hours a week in order to make up for that lost universal credit £20. And it's easy to accuse Johnson and Coffey of being apathetic, of being so far removed from reality of normal life that they simply just do not understand the implications of the £20 cut. But it seems that Johnson's government is merely not ignorant about the lives of ordinary people. Indeed, it is more just social ignorance. It appears to be trading in economic illiteracy. By actively pursuing policies that push families into poverty and by failing to tackle the rising cost of living, the government is engaging in self-sabotage. A 2016 study estimated that around a fifth of spending on public services went on making up for the negative impacts on poverty and equality. And researchers also suggest that social inequality cost the NHS $4.8 billion a year. Thus, as inequality rises, so too does the cost of trying to marginalize that against the worst excesses of these inequalities. And it just doesn't hit direct economic harms that are the problem. A slower creeping economic stagnation is also a very serious consequence of poverty. Everyone will be aware of the shuttered shops that now populate our high streets, a phenomenon that can solely be attributed to the decline of brick and mortar retail, especially when low budget Primark, which doesn't even have an online presence, is doing so well. Instead, we are witnessing some of the consequences of the decline in the disposable income. No matter what your feelings are on fast fashion, the failure of many former household names to keep afloat during the pandemic ought to be seen as a warning sign. Ordinary people's spending power is diminishing. And yes, there was a post-pandemic bounce back, but now we will see the retail sales are in steadily decline and that our disposable income, already below average for developed countries, is now shrinking further. At the same time, the wealth of the already very wealthy individuals is expanding rapidly. The number of UK-based billionaires is reaching record levels during the pandemic, and their fortunes have increased significantly. So, while 13% of shops in London's Oxford streets are aimed at, quote, ordinary income shoppers, have closed during the pandemic, pretty much all the luxury shops on neighbouring Bond Street remain open. We've never been at all in this together. The richest remain afloat, buoyant by the fact, while the poor and the middle income people suffer seemingly proportional stagnation and declines. The trickle-down economics is a theory typically favoured by those on the right of the political spectrum. It holds that by cutting taxes for the richest, their increasing wealth will somehow, quote, trickle down through society by innovation and job creation. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to really work like this. As the rich get richer and everyone else becomes poorer, we start to see a narrower economy. Wealth is poured into sectors frequented by the rich, while ordinary people spend an ever greater proportion on basic incomes and necessities. Indeed, instead of seeing a healthy economy, we will see one that is constrained by the fact that spending power is vastly imbalanced. For the government to squeeze the disposable income is indeed foolish, but it's been especially ludicrous coming from the party that is ideologically welded to the idea of an economy propped up by free-flowing consumer spending. We will now see this increasing inequality, something that our stretched public services will ultimately have to end up patching up. Illiberal and illogical, Johnson's government prides itself on a combination of Victorian cruelty and economic egregiousness. Nothing adds up and nothing makes sense. It is simply a fact of British life that as things get worse for ordinary people, while the elite bask in ever-growing riches. And that is well and truly completely right. We have seen this, and we are in for an absolute terrible winter this year. And who knows what it's going to be like in March of 2022 when we come out of this winter and meet the spring. But I'll tell you now, the next 6 months are going to be very interestingly politically for Johnson. Will he be able to survive this? Will his Teflon sheet remain intact? Will he survive? We'll be seeing either a race between Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss to be who becomes the next prime minister to succeed Johnson. Because I'll tell you now, everything that we are seeing does not bode well for this country. Does not bode well at all. So all I can say is, good luck, because I all think we're going to need it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Like I say, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you